A very good morning to you all present for the second seminar of GCAP Insights. I welcome you all present in this session of GCAP Insights 1.2, and I also extend special thanks to our Managing Trustee Architect Abanidas sir and Dakshadas ma'am, to our CEO Architect Sahil Das sir, Principal Architect Digambar Das sir, and all the respected dignitaries present today, faculty members, and also our dear students for giving us your valuable time for the webinar. I believe the webinar will be helpful to you all. And I am Architect Hirokjyoti Boshya, working as an assistant professor in Guwahati College of Architecture and Planning. And it is my privilege to welcome you all for today's session. We all know COVID-19 pandemic has affected us all. We have all experienced changes in our lifestyles, whether it be major or minor. But nevertheless, we should always emphasize on the positive changes rather than ruminating on the negative impacts of this pandemic. And we have also realized how technological interventions can be a game changer in every field during this pandemic, starting from online classes to webinar sessions and all. This webinar session of GCAP Insight is another attempt from our side to bring in quality educators to you all in a very accessible way. I hope it will be beneficial, and it is my privilege to host this wonderful webinar session with all of you with us. I once again welcome you all. Now, I would like to request Architect Namrata Talukdar ma'am, who is an assistant professor in our institute, to give a brief introduction about the institute. Over to you, ma'am.
I'm sure that you are holding your patience to know more about our institution before proceeding towards the main theme of the webinar. So here I present a small presentation on a brief introduction of our GCAP. Guwahati College of Architecture and Planning, which is ranked second in Eastern region, 21st in 25 architectural colleges in India, and 8 in excellence in Northeast, and only institution having ITPI recognition. When Northeastern states had no architectural colleges and degree courses in Northeast, and students had to travel a far lot distance for becoming architects, Architect Abanidas sir and Mrs. Daksha Das ma'am took it upon themselves to start the college. The foundation was laid by the trust Dona Foundation in 26 January 2006. The new campus of our college was inaugurated by former Chief Minister of Assam, Sri Sarbananda Sonowal. Guwahati College of Architecture and Planning was approved by Council of Architecture, New Delhi, Higher Technical Education Government of Assam, Indian Institute of Town Planning, New Delhi, and it follows UGC guidelines under ASTU University. GCA offers a 5-year bachelor degree course in architecture, 3-year bachelor degree course in interior design, and 2-year master degree course in urban and regional planning. The college has produced 10 batches of architecture, 4 batches of urban planning students, and 4 batches of interior design students with a 100% placement records. I want to show you some visuals of the campus. This is the main block, the interior of the college, our reception, the classrooms, and the labs. Here I present some active movements of the students during our College Fest Exerbia, which in a grand way we celebrate every year. These are some pictures. With this, I want to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I would like to reiterate once more to keep your audios in mute during the session and maintain the decorum of the forum. And you can unmute yourself during the question answer session after the presentation of our guest speaker. And so, dear attendees, it is our honor to have a very renowned guest today among us, that is Professor Architect Shripad Eknath Bhalerao sir. Sir, on the behalf of entire GCAP family, I welcome you to this virtual meet today. Please allow me to give a short introduction. of yours in front of all. So Professor Architect Shripad Eknath Bhalarao sir graduated in architecture in the year 1994, and since then he has practiced as a professional architect as well as he has been an excellent educator and academician. He has around 2 decades of teaching experience and has imparted knowledge and conducted quality improvement programs for excellence in the varied fields of architecture education, music, architecture and its representation in films and such. He is currently associated with the Rachna Sansad Academy of Architecture as an associate professor. He has a master's in computer applications with a specialization in digital architecture. He has been doing a continual research on computer applications in architectural practices since post 17 years. His area of research is extensively based upon pedagogical research on digital parametric design tools and how these tools can be used for form finding. He is also involved in the research on people's participation in smart cities initiative. He has also been actively involved in his own architectural practice and has his own partnership firm, that is Urbanism and Architectural Atelier, under which he has undertaken, designed and executed over 1 million square feet of residential projects, over 700 interior projects, and many more public buildings today. He has also curated, organized various workshops, art festivals on a wide range of topics, ranging from architecture to films and to music and to art. He has also created over 200 digital art paintings and directed and created over 20 short films on various concerns and topics. He also believes in a philosophy for life that goes by as such. Life is for learning and understanding life, and it is continuing the same year after year. So with that, he advocates staying updated and informed to day-to-day knowledge as the policy for overall growth and excellence. So we are very much delighted to have such a multi-talented personality among us today as our speaker for today's webinar. So welcome you, sir, once again, and I would request you to share your thoughts and also to start the webinar session.
Thank you so much, Abanidas sir, for actually inviting me and giving me an opportunity to interact with students and professionals up in Northeast. Because this is the first time that I'm trying to interact with people from that particular part of India. Although we have been getting a lot of students from the Northeast in when I used to teach in other earlier institutes, we used to get a lot of students and they used to travel. So it's wonderful to see that institutes are coming up so that people don't have to migrate just to get educated in architecture. So I really appreciate the kind of institution which has been set up and the wonderful campus which you have shown. Definitely would like to come down sometime into that wonderful campus, because people in Mumbai have buildings as their colleges, and we always like to go to campuses. So on that note, I will start sharing my screen. So we are just beginning with certain aspects, and today's topic is user experience and architecture, UX plus A, which is a kind of movement we have started 3-4 years ago, that I will give you the background in due course when we will be going with the presentation. The slides are just to support. In case you feel sleepy, you can look at these bright colors and try to stay awake, because study says that on online meetings, and which you have been attending as students are there. So I'm particularly addressing students. You have been attending college online and all these online meetings. So average time of attention on online meets is not more than 10 to 15 minutes. So in case after 15 minutes you feel like sleeping, you feel sleepy and you get bored of listening to me, you can look at these bright colors and can stay awake. So there are these bright colors used and there are some interesting slides made. I would probably request in the middle also I might ask you a few questions, and at that time you can unmute and answer, because I always prefer it to be interactive. So if I pose a question, some of you can unmute and answer, because then only we can take it forward. So when we talk about user, I am now starting with designing with empathy. Empathy is something which is missing by at large everywhere in society nowadays. In fact, we really understood the meaning of empathy in last 2 years when pandemic struck. and pandemic did not see who you are, what is your financial background, what is your economic background, what is your educational background, where you come from, and it struck all across society, all across country. And then we started realizing the importance of empathy. So there are these many activities and these kind of word graphics you must have been used to seeing. So I'm not explaining, I've just selected one of the word graphic where most of the words are there which we normally discuss while we are trying to strategize for our design methodologies. So then I come to this particular statement which says that men come together in cities to live, and they remain to live good life. Now, remain to live good life is something which I want to really question, whether it is cities or villages, particularly urban places more so, that do you really remain to live good life, or you are forced to remain there. So I'm just moving ahead, and now I'm going back to history. This is 1994 May. I'm particularly sharing this particular slide. This was my research thesis back when I was in 5th year or the final year, and we used to have the design dissertation and not only the dissertation and not design on that particular topic. So my topic was people and architecture, two sides of a coin. When I was giving the jury on this dissertation book, jurors asked me, are you actually posing against your own profession where you are entering? And I said, no, I'm not, but I'm asking these questions because these questions come to me, that whether we design for people or architects design for satisfying their alter egos. So this is a question which I keep on asking many a times. Do we really design for people, or do we design for satisfying our alter egos and then be remembered as this building was designed by so and so? So this was the first graphic which I made. Back then there were no computers, there were no printers, so we had to actually literally draw sketches, take photographs, print, get them printed and paste them on a book, and then get it typed. They were typewritten books, so our earlier drafts were all handwritten. So this is where you can see that there are these characters which are from Mario Miranda's characters, which he has always sketched on the characters which he saw in Mumbai and Goa. And at the back you will see a skyline of then Mumbai. So these were some of the built forms which were coming up. The Kanchenjunga was there, and then there was this Khareghats building which looked like a chimney, and many other earlier typologies. And what I was trying to see, that the characters of people, and there are characters to architecture also. But then I'm not saying about the characters in terms of graphics, but I'm talking in terms of how people are different. If Mario can see people differently, why not designers also see and understand people differently? What we normally understand people as some anthropometric figures, where we draw one small kid, one male figure, one female figure, and then we just try to measure their measurements in first year, and then we by heart those measurements, and those measurements become figures and statistics for us, and we try to provide as per that. So it's not that the human beings, we objectify the human beings and try to design for them. So these were the initial sketches again back in 94, and I think things have still not changed. So in the hunting era, the man used to just go and hunt and then try to climb up on a tree and sleep. You probably will remember the Avatar movie where they used to sleep on trees. And now also a man comes out, goes for a hunt for money, goes and into one pigeonhole on some floor of a building, just goes and sleeps there. So is there a choice? Are we giving a choice to the person, or are we just providing self-similar built forms which people are staying in? Even a small detail like a bucket handle has changed so much over the period of time. Almost all of you must have once or sometime in life would have picked up a bucket full of water and walked few steps, and you know the difference between the two handles. The old handles used to actually, they were painful. Like if you want to have a long walk, they were metal, so they were hard on your fingers, and fingers used to pain if you walk for a longer duration. But you look at this particular handle where the ergonomics is taken into consideration, the grip becomes eased out, and you can actually easily carry the same bucket for a longer distance, and this is where human comforts comes into the picture. So how many such changes is my question. Now we're not going to find answers in 30-40 minutes talk, but these are questions I'm posing for you to ponder on and think about it while you will be designing or developing your own design methodologies. So how many such changes occurred in architectural design detailing? I'm not talking about technology, I'm not talking about material advancement, I'm talking about detailing of specific nature, like door handles, they don't hurt. At times we have knobs on which, on a wet hand, we can't just open a door because the knobs are round. They look really nice, suave, and when you try to open, you can't open. There are incidences where people have been locked inside toilets because they can't open the lock, the latch with a wet hand, and so many such things. And we have to really think about how many such details are actually designed keeping human comfort and users in mind. Now I'm going to run through few pictures, and once I run through these pictures, I'm going to ask you the difference. They're the pictures of the same things: Eiffel Tower and Hagia Sophia, and lot of pictures which you know all these places. As architecture students, you know all these places. So I've just got these pictures. Can somebody just unmute and tell me what are these pictures and what is the difference? One was during the pandemic lockdown and one was in a normal circumstances. So can somebody tell me what is the difference? What is missing in these pictures if you compare the two? Anyone can unmute and tell me. Okay, all of you know that humans are missing. So if we are looking at these things, if humans are missing, architecture is like dead. So humans make architecture. Humans are the ones who occupy architectural forms and buildings and precincts and open spaces and whatnots, and then only it actually becomes lively. So even without humans, if it is looking so dead, then why are we not considering humans and users as the first preference or the first criterion while we are designing, is my question. And that's why people first. Now you can see the difference between these and these. Here you can see this vibrancy and the kind of how people, in fact, if you look at this particular picture, you can see that how people even occupy and adopt architecture and make it so vibrant. Now as a student of architecture, you will say all these boards and other things and all those things are like encroachments, and they are actually not so aesthetical, and they have changed the way things should look. All these, or you may say that all these people selling street food are not as per our planning strategies and all those things. But if you look at the other angle, this is something which makes things vibrant. This is a tree surround. There was a street play going on. How people have adopted and how they have accommodated themselves to watch a street play, or if there are religious precincts or waterfronts or even a small tea stall, you will always find across the country, anywhere you go, you will have these kind of makeshift furnitures outside a tea or confectionery stall, and you will see people sitting there and interacting. Now again, since I'm from Mumbai, I have some imageries which are from Mumbai. So these are the two different railway stations in Mumbai. One is Ghatkopar and one is a Navi Mumbai Panvel railway station. So what happened when the Trans-Harbour line was being laid, the designs were given to a lot of architects, and they designed interesting forms as railway stations. So you have 7-8 very interesting long span structures standing in various railway stations in the Trans-Harbour line. But what is missing? They have not allowed any vendors on the railway platforms. They have not even a paper stall is not there. Even basic water stall is not there. And all that, if you really want to have, you'll have to walk all across the station, come out of the station, and then near the ticket counters or somewhere you will find it. Now, people in Mumbai are the only thing people in Mumbai don't have is time. So if you really want to grab a small mineral water bottle before you catch a train, you will have to walk so much. So which is better is a question again. I'm not saying this better or that better. This is a question I'm posing, like in the name of creating clean architecture, or you can say that clean spaces and vast spaces, are we actually, and this is exactly what is happening when there are road widening, then we are having 120 feet wide road and 200 feet wide road and 6-lane roads passing through the cities, and then you don't have a simple system of crossing the road and you have to walk so many kilometers, or you don't have an option but take a auto rickshaw or a public vehicle to even go across that particular highway. Otherwise, earlier people used to just walk across. Now I'm coming to it's a little controversial question, but I keep on asking in my talks. Both the places everyone knows, can at least now anyone unmute and tell me at least one of the place? Which are these places?
JKK Jaipur.
Yeah, and the other one? Other one is that Chandigarh things outside Secretariat building. Okay, now why I have included these images is because every time, and that's why I have this term called architectural pilgrimage. Nothing but the study tours, all the students of architecture and teachers go together to visit these places like pilgrims, and there are some fixed places where in 5 years at least you visit once. But whenever I have gone there, I have always found these places deserted without people. Have you ever gone to these places and found lot of people gathered over there unless and until once or twice a year? No. So then, do we really think that these are the places with people-centric approach in mind? Maybe not, because when I had gone to the Jawahar Kala Kendra amphitheater, even at 6 p.m. in the evening, I couldn't sit on that red sandstone because it was so hot at that time also, because it took so much sunlight of the day that it takes time to cool down. And the same thing happens in Chandigarh, because you have either a lot of heat or a lot of cold, and then in lot of heat and lot of cold, these are not the places where we gather. What we do in India is like we try to gather around a small tree surround. We sit around, like every village, you'll have the image of every village in India that there will be a banyan tree or people tree or some large tree around which there is a tree surround and people are gathering and chatting. So that is how people actually find comfort. And then we have such kind of designs where probably the ideas are very good but not probably conducive to the kind of users which it was getting addressed to. And that's why again I'm quoting what F. Wilson says, that the reality of the built environment is more than a design problem. Environment, if not designed to fulfill human aspirations, will either be ignored by its user or destroyed. Please remember that it either be ignored, that you will see a lot of designs not being occupied by people the way they were intended to, or at times later they will just destroy. So if buildings do not enliven and enrich human experience, if their structures do not provide human spaces, humans will rid themselves of them. Now this is a little difficult thing to do, to get rid of architecture, and that's why I always say that if you buy a Gaitonde or a MF Hussain by spending crores of rupees and put it on one wall, and then after some days you think, no, I don't like, I've got bored of this painting or some sculpture, you can always wrap it up and put it on the attic. Where are the attics to wrap it up, the whole buildings which you don't like or the house which you don't like, and put? So you have to live with them, and that is where I actually come from, that this is what happens. Like many people have to live with not so user-friendly architecture which we create, because we not knowingly but unknowingly do not give that importance to the user centricity. So now again some quotes and some sketches. So I'll just go through quickly. The way person perceives an environment is influenced by that person's attitude towards the environment. So now why I'm saying this attitude towards the environment is because the person's attitude is developed by a lot of factors, the regional factors, the cultural factors, the behavioral factors, the technology factors, and many other factors. So X person may perceive space in a particular way, and Y may perceive a particular way. X community may perceive a space particular way, Y community may perceive a space in a particular way, and that is where we have to really start understanding all these things. And that's the reason why it is also very important that the design environments also consider users' emotional needs. And that's where I again will repeat that we just try to address to the physical needs by understanding anthropometry, but we have to also understand anthropology, we have to also understand humanities which we study, and try and understand the end user and the kind of end user which will be occupying the space. It's very important. These are again some photographs again back from 94, my thesis which I had clicked. So person just gets comfortable in a space and architecture happens. That lady is sitting outside on the front yard of her house, a small house. The you can see even the poultry is around, and she's just cleaning some vegetable or something, and still architecture happened. In the other photograph, you can see that there are two cows and a cow shed is within a part of an arch. So because it's from a colder region, so even the cow shed is created by just increasing the plinth and forming an arch to remain or keep them in a warm environment. So all these small decisions which are at times taken even without architects or architects as designers being appointed also normally point towards the user centricity or user experience design. So now this is another thing, that many apartment residents prefer older buildings with well articulated forms over new characterless apartments. This has happened in Mumbai many a times. Many of the people I know had shifted to some plush apartments, and then they shifted back into the human scaled apartments where they used to stay earlier because of the disconnect of humans to humans. And this is what many a times is happening in these gated communities where you have towers and a lot of lush green places around, but then the human connect is missing because there are the opportunities of small interaction places keeps on missing. One of the project I actually liked and where they have tried to create these interactive places was again in Mumbai, it's Trees project by Godrej, where you can see in the photograph that they have tried to create these kind of opportunities for small group interactions, and it stands out separately from many other gated communities. So now I am coming to a point that at times we miscode the environment, causing building occupants confusion and injury. Because we miscode the occupants, it may cause confusion and even injury. Now you may say that how you can make a statement about injury. Confusion, yes, there are lots of buildings where you get confused because there is no clear wayfinding design, and there are lots of other confusing spaces which are created in public places also, public buildings also. I'm not here to outrightly criticize all the architecture happening in our country or across the world, but I'm here to highlight certain points which we can at least take care while designing so that the places will become better. Now you might see there are some text which I have used in Hindi, and then this is also one more thing, that user comfort is also, the language is also important. Like if I come to practice in Assam, and if I don't know Assamese at all and I keep on flaunting my English around, probably not all the users or all the clients be comfortable with me. Same happens in everywhere. Although our fortunately or unfortunately our medium of education or instructions in architecture is English, but there are lots of things which our local languages and local knowledge system has, which we don't learn in 5 years of architecture because it's not there in a manual format, or it's not there in our libraries because our libraries predominantly have only English books. So we are so well versed about the manualized forms of architecture in the Western world and a lot of other things, and we probably may not know what are the developments in our own city. What is the history? What are the local ways of living, building, and which techniques and technologies our ancestors use within our own region? So that's why language also is something which is user centric, and it should be like, if somebody doesn't understand English, doesn't mean that that person is not a knowledgeable person. So that is why I have included Hindi also as subtext somewhere. So injury, a badly designed kitchen leads to spondylitis, arthritis, and many other neck and back pains. Now, when you say a badly designed kitchen means, now we have got these modular kitchens, and there are these drawers coming. There is this there are these advertisements which are going rounds by one interior solution company, where you must have seen those exaggerated moves, like somebody is doing lifting the leg up, and then somebody is trying to pass through, and the drawer is opening. So those are the ones which are user unfriendly kind of designs. Also, when you are lifting some load and bending multiple times in various directions, it always adds pressure to. So we need to understand, while even designing a kitchen, that a user undergoes, or user goes through three processes called as pre-process, process, and post-process. Pre-process is where you do cutting, chopping, getting all the utensils, getting all the necessary ingredients. Then you do the actual process of cooking, and then the post process is serving and other things. So can we actually analyze this? And again, this pre-process, process, and process with every household will be different. People who eat seafood will have a different pre-process. People who eat meat will have a different pre-process. People who are strictly vegetarian will probably have a different pre-process. And again, based on regional things, like if down south, if you go, they will always have one big grinder for their idli batter, and that is a big size grinder. They don't do it in a mixie. So you will have to understand that and provide a particular space for that particular arrangement. You know that there was this, I forgot the name of that movie, but there was a movie just around one particular dish. I think people from Manipur or somewhere, they cook for celebrations, and it has a lot of very peculiar odor, and that's why the neighbors don't allow them to cook, and then they go around finding a place just to cook a particular dish which has a specific odor, and the whole movie is around that. So if somebody is frying fish, and if the neighbor's kitchen is also just around by the side of it, and the neighbors are vegetarian, probably they won't like it. But then these two users needs to be understood. So all those things are important. So I just spoke for 5 minutes on kitchen planning, and you see that how it can be injurious. So even innovative forms is hollow. Like if you have an innovative from outside, is hollow if it doesn't change anything for the user in terms of occupation and its pattern of working. So we have got lots of innovative forms around and happening, and post parametric possibilities and computational possibilities. This has really multiplied in terms of innovative forms. But at the same time, are we also trying to address it in terms of what is happening inside? So then innovation, its impact on building and impact on occupation is important, the occupants. So it's not just innovation and its impact on building, but its impact on occupants is also important. So based on that, I'm just quickly summing this up, that what are the various points which we generally try to address. We have manualized a proper course on user experience in architecture, which generally takes around 20 hours minimum or more than that, and with a lot of other hands-on exercises or site visits and all that. So based on this, what we ask questions is identify the issues, triggers, queries, statements, and gaps, etc. Then why do we have to identify that? Is because this is an extract from a thesis. One of my students did a thesis only on user-centric residential buildings. So who is the beneficiary? Do they really look at it as a problem, or am I fabricating a problem, is also important. So now moving ahead, out of 5 aspects into architectural design, 3 are actually directly related to people. So what I'm saying is that economics, technology, cultural, social, and ecological are the aspects for good architecture. So barring 2 aspects, which is technology and to a certain extent ecology, which are not directly affecting, or although they are affecting, but cultural, social and economical are the factors which are directly affecting or related to people and users. So do we not have to actually understand them? It's our prime duty to understand that. So direct communication with the user is another thing which the commodification of architecture has actually cut these ties or possibilities of direct communication with the user. Earlier, when architects used to design for a particular client, that client and client himself or herself was the direct user. But now there is a builder, or there are developers or realtors who actually develop for some other unknown faces. So that is another problem, and that is where the methodology of user experience design comes into the picture, because not every time we will be able to understand who will be the direct user. Now I gave some examples earlier where I said that things were unoccupied in Jawahar Kala Kendra and Chandigarh, and here are some examples. Like, look at these B.V. Doshi sketches, these axonometrics and elevations. What is so different than many other presentations is that Doshi's sketches will have a cobbler, will have a cart, will have somebody sleeping on a charpai outside, there will be somebody flying a kite, there will be somebody worshipping. So if you look at these kind of sections, this is where the understanding of the end user comes into the picture. And what we see nowadays on most of the Instagram pictures, you know that there is a trend of these red human beings to be shown everywhere, these red figures into the line diagrams, isometric, axonometric diagrams. Now those red dots are like copy pastes. They might be doing various activities, but they are like faceless, characterless human figures. And that is where again I come from, that we are trying to objectify humans. Here the objectification is not there. And why I have particularly taken this particular elevation, and see exactly the same things are happening when it is occupied. You can see kids sitting here, somebody trying to sell a scooter parked and all that kind of stuff. So this is like real connection with the reality. Otherwise nowadays we just have Lumion render presentations where all the people are because the people available are all westerners and in suits and all that. So in every occupied walkthrough, you will see the same people doing these kind of typical movements. But those are not the people who will be occupying the design which we are designing for. This is another mall by Charles Correa in Kolkata, where you can see again how the typical image of the mall is broken, which has glass walls and atrium, is broken down into smaller interactive spaces. And that's why when I visited, I could see people everywhere at every level interacting with smaller groups. Even if you are alone, you can just sit, there is a small fountain here, you can just spend some time looking at the water fountain and all that kind of stuff. This is another design by Sachin Akshikar. This is a market in Panjim. Again, here you can see how it has been adopted and how the spaces for people is created. So let's now start about user experience and architecture. So that was the precursor. Now I am just going to spend some time understanding or making you understand or introduce user experience and architecture. User experience is a term which has come into the field of website design, product design, application design on your phones, and there are a lot of UX designers which are appointed by all these companies. Google has a lot of UX designers, and many other companies. Facebook has UX designers. Everyone have UX designers. Of course, they have actually adopted the methodology from the way architectural design methodology used to be earlier. And now we are trying to extract the same from them, because they have developed a systematic methodology which we can adopt into architectural design. So this is a picture where you can say this is design and this is user experience. So design says that you're supposed to walk on at this right angle, but user says this is where I'll take a shortcut. So this is my user experience. So this is the gap from design to user experience, which we are trying to address and how we can bridge. In all my credits, you will always see Saurabh Karandikar's name along with my name. Saurabh Karandikar is one of the finest user experience consultants and designers in Mumbai. He is been conducting courses on UX in many other institutes. We met a few years ago, and then we started interacting, and then I said that this can be applied in architecture, and then this interaction where we met for a meeting of 15 minutes on a footpath of that particular place, we ended up spending 20-25 minutes of discussing among ourselves, and then came this UX plus A, and we then introduced, and we have run some six semesters. We have run this course in Rachana Sansad as a college project. So a lot of students have actually experimented this and benefited out of this. Architecture was always user centered. If you many of you might have visited Mumbai. If you have visited Mumbai, the Victoria terminus, or now the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj terminus, the railway station, is a very good example of user centric design, because it is designed so many years ago and it still can accommodate so much of crowd, and still you don't feel because of its volumes of the platforms and the heights of the roofs over there, you don't still feel claustrophobic in Victoria terminus. But when you go to any other railway stations where there are like smaller height platforms, roofs, you will always feel claustrophobic. So it was user centric. All the houses, if you look at all your ancestral houses in any region of India, they were all user centric. But it was, and this is the image which actually I get scared of. This image is any image anywhere when you'll have these towers and you're standing below them. It's a scary image. First of all, human scale is not there. There's no identity, and you also tend to lose your identity. So why user experience and design, or why user centricity? Look at this girl. She's completely confused because she is standing with hundreds and thousands of products which are self-similar. Yesterday only there was one post where a orange Surf Excel and a orange Bournvita sachets were kept by the side of each other. The kind of color scheme, the kind of font, the kind of design both the sachets had, if they are kept by the side of each other in your house, you may by mistake end up picking up Surf Excel and put it in your milk instead of Bournvita, because packaging is so similar and design is so similar. So here she's completely confused. She has to now read through each and every small flags and tags, and this is where user centricity is required. Now this is a picture from a movie, a sci-fi movie, and you know that this is Tom Cruise. And what is happening here is you always will see that there is a glass on which there are these gadgetry kind of things available, and the person is trying to operate them. In reality, if you go to any control stations or any remote sensing stations or any surveillance stations, you will never find a glass wall. You will always find a screen and a keyboard and people accessing that on the screen. So here, why such kind of scenes are created, or why such kind of setting is created? To enhance user experience, to to make you immerse into that particular movie shot or that particular act. So even in movies, people are creating such kind of things to enhance user experience. Why not in the real life in architecture? So there are human factors, and human factors are important in lots of fields. So you can see information architecture, industrial design, sound design, interaction design, human computer interaction, that is HCI, visual design. All is encircled by this concept called user experience design, or UX. So architecture is also a part of this UX vertical. And unfortunately, there were no courses available. When myself and Saurav we searched, there were no courses, there was no manual, there is nothing available in a methodical way about user experience design. There were few articles, and that's the reason why we have tried to create a methodology based on the normal UX methodology. We have added a few factors into it. This is another story where you can see that this is a fighter jet, and these fighter jets were used in World War II, and you can see that throttle. Now these fighter jets used to get gunned down by the enemy jets although there were expert pilots sitting, they used to always get gunned down. So anthropologist was called, or human behavioral scientists were asked to observe what is happening. Now in this kind of designs, the throttle was to be pushed in the earlier designs. So that is the flaw. Now what is the flaw? Because if you're driving and there is a splash of water coming in your windscreen in a car, what you'll do, you'll try to squeeze. You'll not say, oh, water has come. So you'll try to squeeze. That means you hold all your organs close to your body. So this throttle, which was to be pushed, they just changed that into pulling. And when that change occurred, all the problems were solved and the success rate of these fighter jets increased. So it was a user centricity thought. What is this? Can anybody tell me? I know I am just going a little slow. We will have some question answer after that. So we may run 10 minutes more than 11 o'clock, but it's important. So what is this? Can anybody tell me? Unmute and tell me. Okay, this is a cap of a toothpaste. Now, can you tell me why the cap of a toothpaste is tapered at one end? Can anybody tell me why the toothpaste cap is tapered at one end and why it is not parallel? Any guess? Anyone? Yeah. Somebody's trying to talk. Somebody's trying to speak. Unmute and speak. Yeah.
Anamita, you can unmute and speak.
Not able to.
Yes, sir. Sir, if the grids were parallel, and in case our hands were wet, our hands would slip through the grip.
No, but then that can happen with the
But
flutes,
like the
yeah, your answer is partially correct. That if there are flutes, because if you need a grip, but even a parallel grip also with the flutes can serve the purpose, no? If there are flutes, I'll be able to grip even a parallel thing, na? If it is not a cone. All right, I'll give you the answer. In the morning, you are in this state, half asleep. So when you are uncapping or opening the toothpaste, it may fall down. If it falls down and if it is a cylinder, it will go away from you somewhere. But if it is a cone, it will take a round and it will remain in that zone. So if it falls on the top of the wash basin also, it will just take a small round and stop. Or if it falls on ground also, it will take a small round and stop. So it will be easy to find. Otherwise, it would just go away if it is a cylinder. I would tell you my experience that you have the lens caps of the camera. So I was once in a Spiti Valley, and that cap I dropped on a you know that these are like hilly areas. So that cap started rolling. It rolled from one road to another road to third road. So I had to literally walk down 1.5 kilometers just to get a cap. So that is how user experience or user centricity matters. I have this film. I will not show this. You can later on Google that there is a film made on how elders react to Google Glass or elders react to technology. I'll just run it quickly, like how they are not able to wear it and they have never heard about it and how they react. You can watch this later. You can just search for elders react to technology or a Google Glass. So whenever technology comes, whenever new things come, it is important that the user needs to be acclimatized to that particular aspect. So now let's go to because there's a little lack of time, you can watch it and these are available. No point in wasting time to make you watch a film which is available on YouTube. So this is a methodology which we normally are following: design strategy, user analysis, task analysis, and environment analysis. So I will explain that. Then there is a structure, that is primary noun architecture and navigation, then content and presentation. So this is how the user methodology goes. This I have already explained that how myself and Saurabh we have come or developed this particular methodology. So user study, formative and summative testing. So whenever you are trying to understand the user, these are the factors which we have to consider: health, age, gender, education, language, familiarity with technology, domain expertise, task knowledge, expectations. And how we are going to do that, or how we do that, it is by methods which are direct and indirect, individual and group, performance and discussion. So these are observations, discussions, direct questionnaires, all those things are the methods which we have to actually adopt to understand the user. Now in terms of user experience design, which is related to applications goes, these are the kind of rooms where people are asked questions and their observations are noted with cameras, and then they come with solutions. We also can think of such kind of things later on, because if we are trying to show a walkthrough, or we have created a walkthrough of our own design, we can observe people's reactions and discussions and how they react to spaces as a third person. But what happens generally is architect goes and says, and he's into that alter ego of I and my. Architects just don't get tired explaining how they have done the best design of life and best design in the world. You must have also realized you don't get tired when there is a jury. Finally, the juror says, please hurry up, your time is up. So you just are explaining everything which is so good, but you're not there to even get the feedback, get the understanding from the user. And that is where we have to understand that we have to also get the feedback from the user. So that is where the real clients, when they react, at times when you pass out and are into a fresh practice, you suddenly get startled what kind of reaction the client has. And then there is this divide of us and they. Then architects, when they meet together, "Arey, client ko kuch nahi samajhta, client doesn't understand anything." Yes, that's why they have come to you, but then you have to educate them, make them aware about the real benefits of certain things, rather than just following the trend. Something is trendy, so everybody start designing like that. So these are now newer methods where you can use immersive system in VR or even cave environment. Like there are six panels where you can see the whole immersive environment inside. You can take use of make use of these or help of these things even before taking design decisions and get user reactions, and then you can actually do it. When you go to a Starbucks or something, some place where you are discussing, suddenly there is one person who comes with these small cups of some preparations, and then the person says, "This is on the house because we are testing." So if a chef creates something, they actually test on the clients, and if it is on the house, if it is not charged, you don't mind even testing and giving a reaction. That is user experience, or that is for user understandings. There are a lot of feedbacks which we give when we buy something. If you go to Amazon or anywhere, when you buy something, you generally go to the feedbacks, like who has given 5-star ratings and what have they said about it, and all that. You read all those and then try to understand if the rating is good, then you buy probably that product. What about architecture? What about the house, which is the most expensive product anybody buys in life? Are there these kind of feedback systems available? Are there some criterions available for the users to understand what should be the interesting place for them to stay, is my question. So even when they are designing and designing websites and all, what is this? These are the eye lines which they mark and say that, okay, this is the first thing the user will see, the second thing and all that. So this is how the methodology in user experience design goes as far as websites and applications is concerned. Do we really mark how the 5 different people will move in our design? We don't. We just say that everyone should enter from here, go here first, then there first, then there first. And that is how we also explain our design. So that is another question I'm posing. So this is a method where you actually create a user persona profile. So if you don't know the user, you imagine the users, but give them a name, give them an age, and create a persona. So if you are designing a residential colony somewhere, you can create such multiple personas, and then what the person wants to know, what the person wants to do in that particular place, if it is a residential place or a commercial place. So try noting down. I also at times say that this is the left brain thing which we have to complete before our right brain starts flying around and create some extraordinary forms which we try to design and build. So after you've got created personas, then you try to understand the information needs and the task needs of that persona and how we can satisfy them in our design arrangements or in our zoning or designing. Then also the beliefs and emotions, expectations are also important. You create certain scenarios and then write those scenarios that if I enter into a particular space, what is the first thing I will need? So let's take an example of your campus. If there is a student entering first time for the admission with the parents, the students will want to know where is the inquiry counter. But when you are going into your campus, unfortunately might not have gone for a long time, but when you start going into your campus, you will definitely not go to the inquiry counter every day. You will directly start going to your studio or some canteen place or some hang around place. So that is how the user behavior changes in a space depending upon the kind of user, the type of user, and the expectations of the user. So who, where, what will they do is important. Who are the users? Now we normally try to divide the users into primary, secondary, and tertiary users. The primary users are the ones who are availing the service or who are occupying the place for the long time. Both, like if you take an example of an architecture school or any school, students are primary users, teachers are also primary users, non-teaching also probably on the verge on the boundary of primary and secondary users. Then who are the secondary users? The housekeeping staff, the accounts, and other people who will just go into one particular place. They may probably not occupy the whole place and move around all the places. And the tertiary users are the parents who are visiting only for some particular functions, or if they're called, if the performance of a student is not good. Then some vendors who are trying to sell books to the college, or some other vendors who are trying to sell certain things, or a person like me. Right now I'm a tertiary user online with Guwahati College of Architecture, because I have here come for just 1 hour. But all your faculty and students are primary users of Guwahati College of Architecture Zoom meetings, because you must be having continuous meetings and lectures on that particular platform. So after all this is done, the tasks analysis is done. So if a user is going to perform various tasks, what are the frequencies which are high, low, what are the priorities, high, low. So all these task analysis can lead you to the proximity charts. Earlier, we normally used to prepare proximity charts only based on what is placed where, but here it can lead to proximity charts by task analysis. And then you do experience mapping. This is a little difficult thing to understand, but experience mapping can be done through case studies of earlier similar places, that you can just have a time-lapse video. If I am going to design a railway station, I'll probably go to 5 railway stations. I'll spend 12 hours, or I'll just set some camera at some higher points and capture time lapse for 24 hours. Then I'll divide it into time zones, and then I'll understand how people behave, what are the types of users, what is the occupancy load at various times. And then I'll come to, and there are now software also available where all these things can be analyzed or mapped. Even if you know that if there is the Google also gives you the kind of crowding which happens at various places. When you are on a Google map, you get those red, green, blue, red, yellow, blue lines where you know that where is traffic and where is not, because it depends on how many Google users are in the cars and how many cars are stuck somewhere. So all these artificial intelligence and machine learning also will come to our help when we go into this user experience mapping. So what are the drives, blocks, thinking and feeling of any user is very important. What is the drive? What are the blocks? What might be the thinking, and what are the feelings? So when I say information, task, then you have these drive, blocks, thinking and feeling, and the perception of the space. So all those things are important. Why generally architects are not so keen on going into the basic detailed analysis of user experience design and providing for users is this pluralistic ignorance kind of tendency. So if there is a bystander and some incidents happens, it is 85% of the time that bystander will help the person. If I just fall on the street and only one bystander is going by, he'll just give me a hand, pick me up and ask whether I am okay. But if I fall and if there are 20 people or 20 bystanders standing, they'll say, "Main kyo karu? Why me? Somebody else will do it." So that is what is our community or any other community is normally going to this pluralistic ignorance, and that's the reason why a user experience has slowly taken such a back seat that we are actually facing problems in the kind of architecture which we design and people are occupying. I'll just run through this quickly. This is one of the finest research thesis one of my students did, and she actually tried to design with lot of user personas. So initially, so these are like older typologies where this user centricity was always there. You had this visual interaction possible, the chawls of Mumbai, and then they used to have lot of celebrations in these places. Now, if the Ganesha has to be celebrated, it is in one remote corner of a clubhouse, which is also at a corner of the whole gated community. So it's not that you can just easily look down and there is a celebration and you can participate while you're cooking in the home. So all these are examples how user centricity started parting way from this. Till this typology is also ground plus 2, human scales was there, interactive balconies were there. But when this gated community concept with towers started coming in place of these buildings, the users are actually isolated. And everyone must have really experienced this. If you are staying in gated community or tall buildings or apartment buildings, last lockdown, you were actually into a cage. You couldn't even interact with people around. Because of technology, you could do video calls, but the physical actual interaction couldn't happen. So this is how it kept on changing, and finally you have got these rented house schemes or slum redevelopment schemes or housing for poor schemes, which are the worst kind of user experience designs, because you have these long corridors which are dark, because you try to provide only one staircase and lifts for this. Then you have such heights, building placed close to each other, and it's actually observed and it's been noted that in such kind of things, tuberculosis and other transmitted diseases are coming back in form of a epidemic in such places. So badly designed places causes injury was an earlier statement. Here I can validate that. So towards the end, I will say that okay, you have to understand multicultural aspect of a user. You have to also understand users grow in age, they grow in number. So if you design for a small kid, the kid becomes 12 years or 13 years, that particular bedroom no one interests the kid. So you have to consider that. Then daily activities also change in various time zones. Like in a space, what happens in the morning, how many people are there in the morning will change in the afternoon, will change in the evening. And even in the weekly activities, the weekend activities and the weekly activities will also have different number of users. And that's the reason why the business districts of any country or probably in India are all deserted on weekends. So if you have a business district where only office buildings are designed, you will see on Saturdays and Sundays there's nobody, it's all deserted. And it's a underutilization of space at times. It can be used for something else when on Saturdays, Sundays, but we normally don't consider that. Then changes of weather and its impact on user comfort and the needs and choices of different users in different occasions. And that's the reason why I'm quoting what Charles Fourier had said, that making housing is like a bird building its nest. You start with a basic house, but you have to let people change it to their own needs. So here the user needs keep on changing, and you should have some possibility in your housing for people to change it. But with the Maivan construction, with all sheer walls and construction towers, you can't even nail a small nail into a wall, let aside making any changes. So you are actually confining or leaving no chance to the user for any changes. This is a case study which I'm just presenting from a thesis. So she studied single adult, family plus family, family plus adults, two single adults staying in one house who are not related but sharing a place, couple and an adult, and she did some 60 such user persona studies. She identified 65 personas. Then she started putting in the necessities of these particular people, and then it codified into what the occupation of the person is, what are the various needs, and this is all imaginary but based on the information which we have. And then she did such 70 different models for various users and their needs as individual models of houses. which then were overlapped to create such kind of a housing where the needs of individual users also were taken care of, and then small tweaks for the vertical connectivity or continuity of toilets and staircases are concerned. Once this was almost done, the student came to me and she said, after so much of hard work, she said, but sir, my building is not looking like the one of the designs which generally elevation nahi hai mere building mein. And then I told her that whatever has the form has generated, it's a generative form, is giving 100% satisfaction to the user needs. Forget about it. Do we really actually, does it really matter to us what color of the car is when we are driving our car? We can't even see the color of the car. Similarly, how our house looks from outside doesn't really matter when we are actually occupying inside and trying to understand the needs and satisfy our needs. So that doesn't mean that aesthetics is unimportant, colors are unimportant, textures are unimportant, but that is not the only thing of architecture. In fact, users and user experience is more important than all those other things. So some of the projects, I'm just giving these lists. You can study the Aranya project by Bibi Doshi, where all these user, even in a mass housing scheme, these smaller spaces were created with these staircases and other things for user centricity needs. Or the incremental housing scheme in Belapur, Navi Mumbai by Charles Correa. All these studies are available on the internet. You can just go. Or even I will say the cardboard house, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is a different aspect of, it's probably not directly a user study, but how the similar grid and the similar frames can tweak and have various kind of spaces created by Peter Eisenman, you can see. And now this is embryo housing and embryo designs by Greg Lynn, where he's trying to understand how the embryo grows in a womb. So similarly, or how the embryonic growth happens in a natural space. This is a parametric way of thinking. How that also can be actually one of the basic understanding to design user-centric or you can say customized kind of designs. This is another thing which I would suggest you should look at. There's an interesting of this particular section. There is an interesting video. It's a Vego Studio Ego City's Vego tailor-made housing experiment, where you can see the whole thing is designed in section, and every user has been given the like, there were people who were interviewed and this was designed. So somebody says that I like books, and somebody says that I want so there are these adventurous things. This is an animated thing, but this is not far-fetched. It can be possible later on. So have a look at this Vego City tailor-made housing project. It is available on the internet. It's done by it's done at TU Delft, I guess. Then this is another interesting project, as you know, that big architects Joachim Gels has done. It's called The Mountain, where he's designed a tower, but you just actually are walking down the roads as if you're walking in front of the house. So you can actually interact, and there are these passages created, and you can walk down these slopes, although it's a tower kind of a housing. So when I come towards the end of this, because this is a very vast topic, and this is what I could convey in a small time. So when we say चलो लोगों की जीवन में खुशियां लाना, उनकी जरूरतें समझने, संवेदनशील नागरिक बनते हुए एक अच्छे वास्तुशिल्पी तो बन ही जाओगे. So if you become a very sensible and a sensitive architect or sensitive you can say citizen, you'll definitely become a good architect. And that's why I actually like this particular शेर. घर से मस्जिद है बहुत दूर, चलो यूं कर ले, इसी रोते हुए बच्चे को हंसाया है. The rhetoric of this is like you are in a profession where, you know, in 4 professions, when we normally say doctors, lawyers, CAs and architects, we are the ones where people come when they're happy, when they have some money and they want to create some happy places. All the other three people, they don't come with so happy faces. Like, go to a lawyer, you are in some trouble and you want to fight a case with somebody. To the doctor, you also have some pain and you want to come out of that pain. To a CA, you will go at the end of the year just to file the things, or if there is a notice by some department. But to an architect, they'll always come with some money and some aspirations and dreams of their own home, their own house, or some place they want to design. So ours is the only profession which can actually really spread happiness. So why not become little more sensitive and spread this happiness in people? And that's why people first is a kind of approach we should take. So with this, I conclude my talk. I know I've slightly gone, I think 10-15 minutes over time. So I would request organizers, if you have still time, I'm open for question and answers. I had kept time for you guys. I'll stop sharing. And yes, thank you so much. Thank you for your time, all the students, architects. I can see Pitkar sir there. I can see Sanjay over there. Thank you for joining in. So over to you, Irak.
Thank you once again, sir, for this wonderful session and sharing your insightful thoughts and informative words with us. And now I would like to request all to kindly ask their questions and doubts one by one without disturbing the decorum. Yes, you can unmute yourself and ask the question. Nandini, you can ask your question.
Nandini Buzar Barua from 5th SEM.
Hello.
Question is, how does my background in architecture help me prepare for a career in UX design?
Okay, it's a very interesting question. I will tell you one thing before I answer your question. An architect can do anything in life. Pitkar sir will agree with me, because an architect gets exposed to a lot of things in 5 years. So you can be a musician, you can be an artist, you can be a painter, you can be a you can make films, you can write, lot of things you can do. Now your question is how it can help you. In fact, architects make real good UX designers. Not only in terms of architecture, but even in terms of if you go into the actual UX designing domain also, because we understand things in that particular way. So you can think of, and in fact UX plus A can be a career in few years, because when you have such large communities being designed, and I'll tell you why. Because post pandemic I had gone to meet one of the big developers in Mumbai for some other reason, and they were asking me how can we culturally activate the site before even flats are being sold. And then they asked me a question, can there be a placemaking kind of thought in that particular site? Now, none of the developers earlier had asked this question about placemaking. They used to just have buildings and a clubhouse. So they are also now keen on understanding the user needs. And then they sent me a particular data which actually had primary user analysis done the way we do it, like personas and how many percentage of people of what age group have come for the inquiry. So in fact, the market is also becoming aware about this. So this is definitely going to be a very good career option with the background of architectural knowledge, whether it is user experience in architecture or any other field also. I hope this answers your question.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Sneha, you can ask your question.
Good morning, sir. I am Sneha Deo, 5th semester.
Yeah.
So my question was, does the principle of user experience give more preference to the functionality of the building or form of the building?
Very interesting question. It actually it works both ways. It doesn't give a preference to any of it. It actually leads to all these things. So a user experience study will lead to some bubbles, space bubble diagrams, not the bubble diagrams which you make, but the space bubble diagrams. If you imagine a user walking with a imaginary space bubble around the user, just imagine. And then if you imagine the user extending hands or moving in different directions in a site, and if you track that path, that will lead to the functional aspect of it. But at the same time, if you imagine the user and number of users in terms of how many users occupied in one place or the other place, that will lead to the aesthetical and the form finding aspect. In fact, why, I don't know why for years we are actually trying to look at forms and form finding and functions as two different aspects. I'll give you one example. Imagine a WC, which is generally designed as 0.9 by 1.9 meters, having height of 9 meters, because in plan your functionalities doesn't say that what should be the height of a WC. So you have designed a WC which is as per the plan, but if it goes 9 meter high, what will happen? Can you tell me, Sneha?
Sir, if you're fixing, for example, if you're fixing the shower, then it will.
That is one thing. But if you just imagine, you look up and then there is this narrow aisle of 9 feet. It will give you that scary feeling of all those shots done into the elevator shafts, in movies. You have these lots of shots, somebody is stuck in elevator shaft and looking up, and it's so scary. So it won't give you that comfort, So user comfort is functions as well as form finding. So it will actually help you in both, in a way. It will not take any vertical. In fact, it will lead to this. And then you will have a very logical reasoning for a particular, if you follow user centricity, nobody can question you about the positioning of the spaces and the shape that space takes, because you will have a very logical reasoning, right? So it is actually leading towards the design solution. That's why I said it's a left brain preparation for the right brain creation. Yeah. Hope this answers your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Namita, you can ask your question. Namita, are you there?
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir. My question was, we were recently learning about how, for example, in a commercial zone, a person would, a contractor would build to its maximum limit or the setback to increase the commercial value of a project, and that would easily hamper the user experience, like you mentioned, for example, the narrow corridors and stuff in the building. So how as an architect would we approach that scenario?
Another interesting question. See, that means you are talking about optimization of space because of the commercial needs as against the comforts of the user. So I always feel that even when they are trying to do the optimization of the space, in fact, it is more problematic in terms of they are okay to give larger corridors and they are okay to give lot of space only to satisfy the primary user. Particularly if you are talking about a commercial space like a mall, if you visit a mall, the corridors for you as a consumer visiting the mall are very wide. Or if you go to a multi-screen theater in a mall, while you are going inside, you are welcome with a red carpet. There are larger, big entrances. Then you have a foyer and you have these popcorn stalls and whatnots and lots of glossy posters of the upcoming movies and all. And what happens when the movie is over? You're thrown out into some dingy passage which leads to your parking. So suddenly yes, it's an anticlimax. You will never see an interesting walkway when you come out of the movie. So it is not. This is not a problem between the optimization of space thought which the client, which is now a developer or a realtor. It is a problem of our thinking as designers. You will at times bump onto some security guard coming out of a changing room of a departmental store because they don't have a separate changing room. So in a trial room, they go and change their uniform. It's such an embarrassing thing for them. You will find that there is no resting place for the janitors who are supposed to clean your airports and your malls and everywhere, and there is no proper place given to them. But then if a client says ki inke liye kya zarurat hai, why do they need a space, you have to understand that why have you ever been frisked with a person who actually you felt that the person is so angry or so adamant and you were frisked in airports or malls? Those experiences are because they are not with a peace of mind, because they are not treated well, so they don't treat you well. And then there are these altercations like why the security guard is so arrogant, or why that person doesn't even smile while he has to smile. So users are everyone. So my point is, instead of actually trying to find a problem between the space optimization, which I agree with, like space optimization will always be there, because if somebody is putting in money, the person needs the value for money. But it's, as a designers, our duty to tell them what is exactly return on investment. Are you looking at only short-term returns on investment, or a long-term return on investment? And are you looking at the happiness quotient of your clients as well as your service providers or service givers, or you're just only looking at the happiness quotient of the visitors? But then visitors will not be happy only by the swankiness of the place, but they also will be happy. And I will tell you why this is important. Shell petrol pumps, if you have visited any Shell petrol pump, they train their employees. The petrol filling person will welcome you with a smile, will ask you few questions after your service is done, also will interact with you. And many other PSU petrol filling stations, the person will just take this nozzle, put it into the cap, zero dego saab, that's all. That's all interaction you will get, because they are also again deprived of these comforts. So users are primary, secondary, tertiary. Every single person occupying that commercial space should have some minimum comfort levels, is something which you can do, and then you can still optimize. So there is nothing restricting you, like narrow corridors or something like that. Even architects, I have seen architects trying to act smart and telling them, नहीं हम लोग और इतने लोग बिठा सकते हैं, और इतने लोग बिठा सकते हैं. So it's a kind of a two-way thing. It's not that always the clients who gives all such kind of ideas to clients. We designers, they are not having the idea ki you can fit in so many more people in such a small space. So it's our responsibility to educate the client and tell them what is real satisfaction, or what is real value for money or return on investment. I hope this answers your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
We have one more doubt from our faculty side. Namrata ma'am, can you ask your question, please?
Yes.
Hello, ma'am.
Hello, sir. Thank you, sir, for such an amazing and interesting presentation. The presentation was not only informative, but students can learn various presentation skills from your presentation, from the slides, because all the video, sketches, write-ups, everything was so merged, so pleasing to see. Everything was so in a very structured manner. So thank you for that,
sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So my question is, to what extent user experience can be considered for designing any public space during the pandemic situation?
Yeah, in fact, I was thinking on all this past 2 years. In fact, it becomes much more important in a post-pandemic situation, because lot of things have changed now. Like suddenly earlier our festivities and crowding were like for us to actually go out in crowd and forget ourselves, like whether it's Durga Puja or Ganpati or any other place. What we used to actually do is we used to actually lose ourselves in the crowd, and because you're not seen as an individual in the crowd, you can even dance. If you can't dance also in a procession, you could. Or even in daily needs in public places, there used to be, like, we used to accept everything in now we are not. So there are a lot of things which we'll have to consider in terms of user experience design. All public places, be it parks, gardens, and all those kind of places, or be it transportation places, we need to really understand a very different kind of user experience now, is the hygienic comfort of the person, or hygienic perception of the person. So I have seen that when I was traveling, one person asked for a RTP, asked for the kit, the PPE kit from the person, because now at airports they're not giving, or it's not mandatory for a PPE kit. So one person asked and wore, everyone started running and made a lot of crowd over there and started arguing why usko diya meko kyun nahi, and then they had all the kits, but now it's being relaxed, so they only give the shield. And then I went there and asked those people, if you're standing in the crowd of 15-20, you're already violating the norms of social distancing, and then you're asking for a PPE kit. So what happens is our attitude towards crowd is still the same. So all those SOPs in office buildings also have to be really becoming difficult to be followed. And then probably this may not remain as it is. Like we think that it will remain as it is for rest till eternity. No, probably after 2 years, or even now in UK, all the norms have been it's all open. UK is all open now, so they are behaving as if it's normal. So probably we may have to think about these things as contactless and other things as our design objectives, but not as overpowering as I feel like as a normal user experience design. Hygiene was always there. I'll give you an example. WCs were never a part of a house in village. WCs were always away from the house. There used to be a backyard. And the very simple logic somebody told me that when you come out of a WC, and you wash your feet, the 12 feet will be wet, the 13 feet will be dry. So when you're coming in a house, you're not getting even wet feet or even the germs in the house. So probably we may start revisiting those kind of hygienic norms in at least house designs or something, but difficult, like it's very difficult to predict. But yeah, we can ask the users themselves. It's a very interesting thing. We are also thinking on these things. We have not come to any conclusion yet, but yeah, there are things which will change as a user experience. If you are talking about going to a theater and sitting on alternate seats, what will the lovers do? They want a corner seat next to each other, no? When they go for a movie. So if you ask them to leave one seat vacant, the user experience is completely gone. So all those things are there, like although it's a kind of a funny situation which I am narrating, but there are lots of such things which have changed, and we have to come back. Fear is something which we have to control. So user perception of everything has changed currently. I personally feel it won't last long. We will come back to normalcy.
Thank you, sir.
We have one more question from a practicing architect, that is architect Vipul Burman, sir. Sir, are you there? Vipul Burman, sir. Hello, sir. Vipul, sir, are you there? Okay, so Vipul sir had a question about like what technology or criteria that architects can use for architectural visualization, that is the AR and VR experience that we need to provide to our clients. Yes. Because most of the clients, they are not privy to all this new technology. So yes. He is asking the question that what technologies can be used by architects.
Basically, when computers were not there, we were presenting hand-drawn perspectives, and they were why we need three-dimensional representation is because a normal human being only perceives in 3D. The plans and sections and elevations are like Greek to them, so they don't understand plans, and that's the reason why, whether it's a hand-drawn sketch or to a level of AR and VR, it's about that we have to simulate the experience. So earlier, you know, that where people were so expert in quick perspectives and renderings and all, and when we were learning architecture, the rotarings and the watercolors and the photo inks and many other things, the senior architects will agree with me, were the most important tools. As I passed out, suddenly AutoCAD and presentations and renderings became important in tools, and now we are talking about immersive experiences of AR and VR. So AR and VR is something which they are, in fact, our clients are more used to AR and VR than us. We always feel that clients are not used to, because people are looking at visual VR experiences on YouTube and many other 360-degree sites on internet, where these live VRs are available for historical places and everything. People are watching a lot of animated movies where VR experiences are there. So I think it's only us which we have to learn these things. Like in fact, not that we have to be expert in technology, we have to be expert visualizers. I always say that an architect may not know how to create a VR experience, but architects should be able to visualize. Nowadays what has happened is architects think that they have to be a VR expert or a 3D expert and create some crazy forms and try to present, and when it comes to execution, it creates a lot of problem to the engineers and the executors. So VR is a very simple tool, you know that Facebook or somebody has now tied up with Ray-Ban, and you are going to get the Ray-Ban goggles where you can just tap and you will see. So it's not about making clients aware, it's about the cost of technology which is keeping us little away from it, because getting a VR render from an expert costs a lot. But if you, what is most important for an architect is that you should be able to create the exact visualization simulation of a 3D model. Rendering is not something which is difficult. Creating that particular model with right kind of form and details is important. So technology se zyada it's important to actually master the tools of model making, 3D model making. So technology just adopts them. Like if you have a 3D model, then you can 3D print the model or you can convert a VR experience. That's easy. That's the easier way. The harder part is creating the right kind of a visualization model of 3D space which we are imagining. I hope it answers the question.
Yes, thank you, sir. And with this, we have almost come to an end of our today's program. And now I would like to request Architect Ankur Jyoti Datta to extend the vote of thanks. Over to you, Ankur, sir.
So good morning to one and all present here. Honorable guest speaker, Architect Shripad Eknath Bhalerao sir, respected Chief Administrator and Managing Trustee Architect Abani Das sir, Trustee Daksha Das ma'am, CEO Architect Sahil Das sir, and Principal Architect Digambar Das sir, and all the attending participants. On behalf of Guwahati College of Architecture and Planning, I extend a warm welcome to the people present in this online gathering. It is such an honor for me to get the opportunity to thank all the dignitaries present here. I extend my gratitude to our honorable guest speaker, Architect Shripad Eknath Bhalerao sir, to take out time from his busy schedule and grace this event. Thank you, sir, for inspiring and encouraging us with your beautiful thought process and thought-provoking ideas on user experience and architecture. And I hope that we will get many more opportunities in future to interact with you again. I would also like to express our profound gratitude to our Chief Administrator and Managing Trustee Architect Abani Das sir, Trustee Daksha Das ma'am, and CEO Architect Sahil Das sir. I would also like to thank our beloved Principal sir, Architect Digambar Das sir, for his guidance, and also thank Professor Y.D. Pitkar sir and Architect Biswa Das sir for attending the webinar, and hope that in our future webinar series also you will grace us with your presence. I would also like to thank the coordinator and organizing team, Architect Parangam Das sir, Architect Namrata Talukdar ma'am, Architect Ankudip Chetia sir, for making the webinar a great success. I would also like to thank my colleague Architect Hirobjyoti Bosho for beautifully hosting the session. And finally, I would like to thank all the faculties, students and attendees who have turned up in such a great number. Once again, I thank all of you for your cordial cooperation and wish all of you a very pleasant day ahead. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Ankur sir. And thank you, Shripad sir. Thank you all once again for bearing with us for today's session with so much patience. And we hope Shripad sir will come to give us such lectures more often. And
definitely, anytime.
Meet you soon in the next webinar. Till then, take care. Thank you all.
Thank you.